We mute ourselves.
Good evening and welcome to this virtual event from Majors and Quinn. My name is Steph and I'm a bookseller and events associate here at Majors and Quinn. For those who don't know, we are a small independent bookstore in Uptown Minneapolis. If it's your first time at one of our virtual events, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And if you're returning for a second, third, fourth event, welcome back. Thank you for your continued support of our program. We so appreciate it. This evening, I am thrilled to introduce three amazing poets who are going to be sharing some of their work. So tonight we have with us Christopher Salerno. And he is the author of 5 books of poetry. His most recent book, The Mangrave, won the Lexi Rudnitsky Award from the Percy Books. Previous books include Sun and Urn, ATM, Minimum Heroic, and Whirligig. His work has received the Glenna Boucher Award from Prairie Schooner, the Founders Prize from Rhino Magazine, the 2 Sylvia's Press Chapbook Award, the Laurel Review Chapbook Prize, and a New Jersey State Council on the Arts Fellowship. His poems have appeared in New York Times Magazine, New Republic, American Poetry Review, New England Review, and elsewhere. He serves as a professor of creative writing at William Patterson University in New Jersey. We also have Michael Bazzett, who is the author of 4 collections of poetry, most recently The Echo Chamber from Milkweed 2021, a recipient of awards from the Frost Place and NEA. His poems have appeared in the American Poetry Review, Tin House, the Threepenny Review, The Sun, The Nation, and Granta. His verse translation of the Mayan creation epic, the Popol Vuh, was named one of 2018's best books of poetry by the New York Times. And lastly, but not least, we have Devon Walker-Figueroa, who is the author of Philomith, selected for the 2020 National Poetry Series by Sally Keith. She is a writer, editor, and erstwhile professional ballet dancer who grew up in Kings Valley, a ghost town in the Oregon Coast Range. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the 2018 recipient of New England Review's Emerging Writer Award, Walker-Figueroa has published poems in such journals as the American Poetry Review, The Nation, Poetry, Lana Turner, the Harvard Advocate, Plowshares, and the New England Review. Devon is currently enrolled in NYU's Fiction MFA, teaches writing courses at St. Joseph's College in Brooklyn, and serves as the co-founding editor of Horse Thief Books. Now that I've introduced our authors, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the comments. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And also in the comments as the event progresses, feel free to put any questions that you may have for any of these poets. After they each do their individual readings, we'll be having a little group Q&A at the end that'll last about 15 minutes. And so with all of that out of the way, we can get started. And we're going to start off with Michael Bazzett. Michael, it is all you.
Thank you so much. I'm always tempted to just leave myself on mute and read for like 15 minutes that way. See what happens. Thanks everyone for coming. And here's the first poem in the book. It's called History, and it's after Jameson Fitzpatrick. History. The vinegar tang of a glass of wine left out on the counter overnight, the hint of cumin on your fingertips, dried lavender. All this is the smell of you in summer, and now it is history. I woke alone and slid my legs into the twin flannel tunnels of my sweats, and it was history. I walked down to the 7-Eleven for a big gulp in lieu of coffee, and this ill-considered choice was history. The sweet syrup in the mix had never seen a cane plantation. It was born of corn, which is what the ancient Maya said the first people were made of. And yes, this too was history, is history. Our ability to take a moment here to quibble over verb tenses is a consequence swollen fat as a paperback, some thoughtless person left out in the rain of history. The melodramatic line breaks in this poem are history, both the relatively justified length of line and the use of the word justified to suggest things come out even in the end are history. And the head fake back there in stanza 1, where you thought this might be about the end of a relationship, but discovered otherwise, is history. As is your inclination to continue trusting me, because the fact that I can take the time to write this all down, considering what to include and what to leave out, as I tap keys that were injection molded out of a blend of thermoplastics by distant people I will never have to think of again, is one definition of history. One definition, not the first and not the last. So the next poem I'd like to read is called Costume Shop. I actually somehow wrote a mask poem, even though it was back in 2018. Costume Shop. Inside the mask, hot with my own breath and the toxic smell of cheap rubber, I look through eye holes into the mirror and see a predictably demented clown. This is no good, I say, unpeeling the damp latex skin to feel the cool air of the shop. I was told you would have something more transformative, something more real. The clerk goes quiet, then breaks into the grin of an old friend. Okay, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe we should go to the back room, yeah? The hallway behind the counter smells of corn chips and the carpet is mossy. I didn't realize you'd already committed, he says over his shoulder. I usually get some advance notice. I nod, not wanting to derail things. So I'm not prepared when the door opens and we step into a well-lit examination room with a tile floor. So there are a lot of different compounds, a lot of different skins. This, he says, using tongs to wetly lift a membrane from its steel tray. This is the lining of a sow's stomach, peritoneum, very useful. And he smiles as if he'd grown it himself. So what exactly are you looking for? He asks, pulling on a pair of blue rubber gloves with a snap. Well, I'm hoping to look a lot more like me. And I was told you'd have something professional, something semi-permanent. He smiles. Permanent is a funny word, because nothing is, you know? And he flicks a light switch under the counter and gestures to the illuminated shelves behind him, lined with glass jars, each one holding a kind of large, veined leaf, slack and folded into itself as it floats in a clear solution. After a moment, my eyes catch on what looks like a millipede clinging to one leaf, and I understand it's not a millipede, but an eyebrow, and the lightly veined leaf is not a leaf. You should see her face, he says, and I wonder if he means the words as some kind of joke. But he's no longer even looking in my direction. He's reaching for a jar, and there it is, waiting for me. So I think I'll read a really short one. I'm going to read some new poems tonight that I haven't read before, which is always kind of fun. This is called What I Did. First, I became a lake so that I could never drown. Then I became the wind so as not to lose my breath. Finally, I became fire so that I would be a tongue and make luminous the murder of what I most desire. So there's a lot of poems in the book about hunger, appetite, desire, probably different ways of putting it, thinking about it. The book retells the myth of Echo and Narcissus at its center, but it's also really, I think, intrigued with where we're kind of at in these late stages of capitalism. And this poem is called Menu. Once you've found your upholstered seat and a slightly elevated vantage point from which to enjoy the war, Perhaps you'll wish to consider our menu. The seared tuna with lemons, halved and roasted on the grill, provides an apt accompaniment to the sophistication of modern combat. The ruby flesh nearly melts on the tongue, the bed of arugula and shaved cabbage serving as a welcome bit of structure. Might we also recommend a lightly oaked Chardonnay to accompany the drones hovering in over the desert? Its slight muskiness complicates the aridity of what is essentially insect-delivered weaponry. Our marinated pulpo can be followed by a salad of fennel, dill, and pine nut that will lightly cleanse the palate. When the concussion of distant artillery thrums up through your espadrilles, nothing really hits home like our molten chocolate gâteau, laced with bourbon, raked with AK-47 fire, then served in spattered clumps alongside the still smoking cartridge. That saltiness you taste is simply a touch of your own blood, drawn quietly from your veins last night while you dreamt of other things. This poem is called Career Day. I'm a teacher. I teach high school, and I love the idea of career day and having adults who aren't necessarily calibrated to the classroom come in, and how quickly things can go off the rails. So I decided to have a little fun with that idea. Career day. Any questions? I ask. After my brief lesson on how to field dress a hair with one slit from neck to hip. I've draped the body on a wooden drying rack at the front of the classroom, and it is dripping onto the towels I have laid beneath, dark towels to avoid stains. The children are quiet. Oh, come on, I say. There is no such thing as a stupid question, just stupid people. Finally, one girl raises her hand. Can you tell us where the mind ends and the world begins? Ah, a philosopher, I say, playfully brandishing the freshly cleaned blade before I wipe it once more on my corduroys. Well, I don't know the answer to your question, but I am going to keep talking because I am a grown-up at the front of a classroom. And you, little girl, what was your name again? I don't have one, she says. I was a wild hare until just a few minutes ago. All right, well, just two more. This one's called Florida. Never read this one before at one of my readings. I'm excited. Florida. Watching baby alligators in their white needle teeth go to town on the bloated corpse of an indeterminate mammal is not my favorite way to begin a Tuesday. At least I have coffee. I'll take a walk on the beach, I said, not planning on seeing a seething mass of reptiles swarm the hulk of what was once a domestic pet and tug at its remarkably rubbery flesh, then jerk their heads back quick, as if tossing back a shot of low-grade mezcal, because alligators cannot chew. Watching them scuttle and work their teeth in a sideways sawing motion that might be employed by an inebriated man going after a cheap cut of meat is a reminder that successful evolutionary design does not have to be beautiful. No, it can also be about gnarled things peeled like bark from the rutted tree of ancient hunger, then loosed to shred a body you might have called good boy in a foolish lilting voice as you scratched behind his ears, snugged him close, and he shut his eyes in bliss. And I will close tonight with the final poem in the collection. We'll put the parentheses around it. It's called The Comedian. I'm very excited to hear Christopher and Devon read. And thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. The comedian. The comedian slips the mic from its stand, gathers the excess cord in a loop, and placidly stares at the audience. A few people titter expectantly. He paces, stops, shifts his weight to one foot, and the murmur dies away. The comedian's eyes roam the crowd. He raises an eyebrow. A woman guffaws, a ripple of laughter. Time passes. The audience shift in their chairs, making papery sounds. A man clears his throat. "Come on," someone shouts. More minutes pass. A few people shake their heads, chuckling. Others sit stoic, not chuckling at all. Whispers simmer through the crowd, and people begin gesturing to one another. Is this the joke? Us? Near the back, someone says a name. Andy Kaufman, as explanation. After 7 minutes, the comedian slips the mic back into its holster and whispers, "You have been a great audience ever since you were born." His voice breaks. He is still as glass. It seems he might shatter. Instead, he begins to take off his clothes. There are more clothes underneath, and then more clothes underneath. Eventually, his body begins to peel away, and it becomes clear he's not a man, but a slender woman, and then no longer a woman, but a heron, and not a heron, but a blade, and not a blade, but the light it catches as it falls, and soon he is not even that. Thank you very much. I turn it over to Devon.
Thanks so much, Michael. And here we have Devon.
Hi. Thank you so much for that gorgeous reading, Michael. I was thinking of John Cage too during the comedian. I was like, oh, the papery sounds, the audience making their symphony of sounds. So good. And I'm looking forward to hearing Christopher read as well. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you Steph and Magers and Quinn for hosting us. It's really such a pleasure and to connect with you all. I'm going to start out reading a poem from my collection, Philomath, called Afterbirth, and then figure it out from there. Oh, it's 8:18. Sorry, just noting the time. All right. Afterbirth. Reed, who's got one strike left before he gets life, tells me afterbirth is what the cougars are after. Lambing season, he says, plus placenta's a delicacy to a cat. I try to explain how intent they were, how their intentions appeared to involve me. But Reed won't hear a word. My mother takes me at my word and won't let me leave the house, so I learn to regret my stories for weeks watching for hunters only to find what's hunted. The gray diggers interring green walnuts at the feet of the tree they fall from. Now, all I can think of is blood. How we first feed on it without knowing we feed on it, or that it possesses a plan all its own. Every girl I know has started, nicknamed it Florence or Flo or the red badge of courage. It'll be years for me. When a doctor finally says, "You've fallen so far off the growth chart, I'm worried you won't find your way back." I'm 14 and can still go out shirtless without causing a stir. Eat more butter, he says, but I don't yet believe what I eat will help me hate my body any less. Reed doesn't hate his kids. He loves them too much, is the story. People tell me to avoid him, but I don't. His flocks graze the fields, I drag my shadow over, and I have nothing better to do than gaze at interminable feeding, mumbling Exodus under my breath, some passage about bearing false witness. And I think I know by now that knowing involves the senses turning a touch licentious. My parents haven't known each other in years, and no one wants to know me either. A tree falls in the woods. Consensus leaves us cold, etc. Green eggs and ham. I really dislike that kid's book with all its I would nots and could nots on boats and in woods, all its reds and its greens intermingled muck of inks you should never swallow. A doctor hands me a copy, says, "Go, enjoy," and pulls a plastic curtain between us. I'm 3 and can't yet read any word on my own, but God. He reaches his hand, gloved green, inside my mother and says, "What about this weather we're having, just between us?" I warn the story's star not to touch its plate, but in the end, it'll do what the good doctor has scripted. I throw the book. My mother stops, singing beneath a stream of steaming water, a red-black masta hissing at her feet. "Find your father," she commands, so I run through yellow meadows, yelling his name which the hills give back to me, though he can't hear them from the other side of this state. On the other side of this state, my mother finds her first horse. It is 1980, decade of the single wide and no children in the picture, just a mare called Chianti who dies 1 year before I'm born. Her heart, size of a child's globe, fails while foaling, something involving a decayed length of intestine and great pain. My parents take great pains to save her, but the foal will lose his mother the instant the air enters his chest. In Egyptian hieroglyphs, I can be rendered as a single reed, and meadow as a row of 3 reeds bound by a flat line of horizon. I know little, even now, though enough to say my name and know it's not mine, but just some inadvertent testament to my mother's love of horses and good breeding. In an ancient 17 magazine, an English girl of means straddles a dappled purebred bearing my name. 17, the age I am, when my interior starts giving up the way it's meant to, with blood, and thanks only to pregnant mares held captive, their urine stolen for the green tablets I made to swallow. And though I feel like a martyr outgrowing martyrdom when it happens, a sacrifice of sorts still takes place inside me. I am the first to admit I'm kind of a poser sometimes, like when I convince my friend Anne I've started, when in fact I've only lifted my mother's lipstick to tint my underpants the right shade of red. Sure, I've begun to forget my mother's writing as it appears in Arabian horse world, some piece on giving birth and up and tricking a strange mare into caring for a foal not hers by painting it up, by daubing it down in the afterbirth of her stillborn. What more could one ask for? My mother once rubbed moonshine on my gums to numb the pain appearing inside me. Moonshine, the name given the foal dressed in after birth and therefore breathing. All right. Thanks, everyone. Let's see. Okay, I have a few minutes here. I think I'm going to read the last poem from the book and then a poem from my next manuscript, which isn't a book yet, but I hope it will be. All right, this one's called Gallowed Bee. And it was originally a villanelle, not anymore, but you might hear it in its bloodstream. Gallowed Bee. The nearest landfill's nowhere near, and no one is to blame. We burn the year's news in the meadow, in the mind, till the crosswords and the funnies wilt to winter kill. I trace the day and epitaph in ash. Hallowed be thy games. Every story is ashamed to be true. My father's now a widower, and no one is to blame. My sister doesn't laugh, plots to live on land turned tame where the soils kissed with concrete yields no wine. It's all the same to me, if we winnow, if we win. I tell myself the story that I'll visit distant cisterns, let their sallow walls win me over, lift my low life and lowly frame of mind. My father gets fined for burning out of season, says he doesn't get why. So the days go slow and I climb a pulsing fence that stops, no bucks nor does observe. The neighbors' piglets wallow in their loam. Still, the world is wide if the hymnals hold true, and every beast has a mind to get loose from a valley fallowing toward fowl. My sister braids my waist-length mane, says this place is lame. I try to tell her no one is to blame, but the sky is so hollow it swallows every name. And the last thing I'm going to read is a poem called Lazarus Species. And without further ado, you don't even need to be born again in order to be born against this riddled wall, each bayonet in love with your bare stigmatic neck. Strange, the worst part is the waiting to survive. Stranger, let's wait for the cave to act out its name. Invite the sun in for the final rendezvous. Oh, to be you. Remember when you lived in a century still afeared of wild boars? Now they march on Athens once again to remind us how frail our own endangerments. It's a shame, I know. You pay someone to puncture you. The decades were lost is the TV show you watch until there's no season left, but the one caressing your window. It's overcast. It's overkill. Time to draw the curtains and play dead. Once I was on a plane, all ocean blinding down below, a bald woman seatbelted beside me. She was high in every sense, said, I lived my father alone to lead his life, and offered me $100 bill. Here, this is my business card. Please stay in touch. Please wear a toga to my funeral. Bad enough to find yourself in a book of vanished things, reports of vessels gulped down by listless seas, whole farms smuggled up into an Oklahoma sky. Now, to be born again and still without 1 ounce of faith in the durability of anything but silk. I took the bill and bought myself a used priest's robe, which I sometimes don when I feel most prone to survival and lament. I too have not been seen in many years, so many years. Even the sycamores presumed me dead, and the boars began to dream of meats far more exotic than my own. Extinction is said to be an event, but I can tell you nothing is more uneventful. You find your family, your whole phyla and future buried in some encyclopedia and glean how small the risk of eternity, how great the risk of not being reached for. And under your entry you find a man discovered your decline and so became famous by the standards of his day. There was no reasonable doubt the last individual had expired. So the search for you grows, exhaustive until it dies down, and no one watches the embers, but some cancelled god retired forgetting his own mellifluous names. I search for my life as well, you know, some passing evidence besides the noise which drifts about me, so much exhaust inquiring. Is this grief, the inexactitude we'd hoped for? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Devon. All right. And last but not least, Christopher.
Hi there. Wow, Devon and Michael, those were just stunning poems. And I want to thank Majors and Quinn also for having me here. I can't wait to rewatch this video so I can listen again to those poems. So I'm going to read from my new book. It's called The Man Grave, and I think I'll just let it speak for itself. Thanks. This poem is called Headfirst. Just a boy then, I was struck hard by a car and arced over the roadside. Despite the pain, I told no one how the man driving kept on driving. I hadn't yet found out about the body or velocity, or what a wound is, and how some bruises flower, spread like steam on the mirror, blurring all beauty. My mother says the 80s were terribly rapey. She hisses into her rotary phone. Says a man may leave his voice inside of a stranger forever, place something hard as a blood-flecked stone. When I awoke in the road, I rested my little chrome bicycle by the curb, the smell of lilac, the sound of traffic starting up again in the street, shapes that keep us awake decades later. What do I know about all this thickness, about the slant rhyme of fear and underwear? Haven't I walked around with a killer's power, swaggering until now? But any boy's teen years, days spent pursuant to puberty, the body as factory, I would have driven high across this enormous darkness just to watch a woman unbutton air. I should be writing this with fear, knowing I was danger. This is called Sports No One Follows. Standing in the septic field, I fire the 45 into the woodpile that runs along the tree line like a train. Then come bumblebees big as eyeballs, and my grandfather whacks 6 with a badminton racket. Down they go into the wet crabgrass. Me, too young to reload the gun. I don't know who invented violence, but how's this for manly? A long, drawn-out war during which some of us will die with our eyes open. This poem is called The Reenactment, about a war reenactment that I attended some years ago. What mattered in early wars was the cavalry marching through deep muck, the fife and drums, stern ravens, words called out across small, stagnant ponds. They tell us every landscape longs to be a battlefield. Someone fires a cannon the size of a cave, and we watch as shockwaves italicize the trees. We, the living, try channeling the original grief. But this battle is nothing like I thought it would be. I have little idea what it takes to hold a field, or why someone might like to dress up as the dead, those blown forward in a crowd of men. Quick fuse, young man with a bandage and a period gun sings an anthem from the archive, steps through a cloud of cannon smoke. White sight, a horse-drawn darkroom rumbles by. A butterfly flags, the gods never arrive. This is called Men Who Won't Travel. Snowplows smack the manhole all morning long. Inconsolable crows rise and reset. What I have memorized is moving again. Winter sun hitting the substation fence, a rubric for evening as December strains after its own vanishment. Once the pigeons return to the rooftops at dusk, having proven their part in the natural history of distance, I will eat a pink grapefruit from a faraway place, pinch the little wooden seed, and whisper to it the word Tallahassee, which is the name of the city where they discovered the sun. I would like to go there, but I am impossible to move, like a canoe packed with snow, a thing you only row with your eyes. It's another in the series, excuse me, called Sports No One Follows. Sky the color of which Gatorade flavor? We guess at the metabolism of clouds, by measuring our shadows on the wet playground. So this is the lithosphere. We can hear them sliding, the tectonic plates, genderless as panes of polished glass in the underground museum of men's loneliness for men, which houses only the sound of air rushing out of a deflating ball, like the hiss of a goose when you've gotten too close, who won't let you pass until you make your soft little sound of subordination. Don't be afraid. No one else will witness this, the lull of your life. Here, all evening, trees will reach toward and away from each other because of wind. They too do their best to never let themselves touch or admit that their bodies have teamed up in dreams. Don't tell me you love only the wide silence that's been imprinted in our code when you've seen the catalog trapped in winter branches, the soccer goal gaping with shame. I've never read that poem before. That was weird. One of the things that's funny, and I'm sure that all of us can attest to this, is that you write this book and then it is published, and then you give these readings and you realize like you don't feel quite like embodying some of them at certain times, and so the giving of readings is like such a different journey than the writing of the book, and so they don't always sync up, I guess. This is called, it's another poem I've never read before. This is called Advice Containing Mostly Impressive Belches. Don't be the boy who eats things for money. Don't listen at doors or you'll be seized by the hair. Don't let the pitch of your voice lift too high around other guys. As you reach into your lover's coverall beside the dead poet's tomb, remember to point out the monarch butterflies, the tulips torn apart by fastidious rains. If the conversation lags, don't say a penis for your thoughts. It'd be lovelier to say the wine is on the table breathing. Personify desire only when love threatens to do less. Didn't they ever teach you how a word works? How its wings can operate in any old wedge of sky as long as you be a voyaging body? You will find your new language in the V of a tree. Carve your initials into its thick trunk, male metaphor of slow growing. To see a man without his hair is nothing. To see a tree without its bark is sycamore. You must try not to speak when your face is in lather. Try not to sob at parades. When you say your final words of the day to your God, ask her to lay the august thing down along the man line. Tonight, as the raccoons gather on the neighbor's roof at dusk, light yourself some lamps before it gets so dark you can't even see your sewing. I'll just read a couple more here. This is called A Man Naming a Feeling. A man walks into an emotion, sits down and orders a word. Word tender brings him a bowl of chestnuts, a glossary, a glass of Amaro. The man's been married to blackouts, like the dark-eyed birds that smack the windows of his house while trying to fly through. There are rituals he did not know he knew. He walks his blind retriever through the graveyard at dusk, stone after stone, confused by the beauty of a memory, blurred by grief, until finally overhead, the sound of honking geese. Some punchlines take us a year to hear. A man walks into a bar with a pocket full of rusty nails. He will bury the nails beneath his wife's pink hydrangea. The acid in the rust will force next year's flowers to come back blue. Some days it's a little darker than this. A man walks into an emotion, sits down and orders a word. His beard has grown all the way to his belt. These chestnuts, he says, are as smooth as the butt of my grandfather's rifle. But what do you feel, the word tender asks? Like geese on a darn sheet of ice. Like all my dogs are running in diagonals. Ah, so you feel grief or hurt or horror, the word tender says. Lost, the man looks at himself in a spoon. His ears are two parentheses, inside of which sit the bleached bones of nouns. This is called Old Man Cursing a Fox. I can't tell you how vivid the sorrow of a whole life seems moments after seeing a fox gnaw a young groundhog's stomach full of sour cherries. Better if the bobwhites do not call faintly to each other in the underbrush. Better to be wary of the trotting fox, who guidebooks say will never relax. Today you see him dragging a pair of antlers over your far meadow. In the sun, one antler is glistening with sap. You hold at the tree line, watch this illicit fox task unfold. You try shouting at him to stop. You whip your wet scarf against an oak, and still the fox doesn't look up. You shout at him with all you've got, your terrible dream from last night about what this world cannot afford. Oh, I don't know if I should. I don't even know what time I started, so I don't know if I should read one more or two more. All right, I'll just read one more. This is called Don't You Have a Favorite Hour? People rise out of the hour of day they love. At noon, I like how loudly the pink azaleas bloom beneath the cambered pine. The way our eyes auto-tune each blade of grass into the grass, as if a lawn could be orchestral. This sounds like a line, but the deer skull lying in the briars contains a hive. Take no fruit there. Let's pretend it's November, and all the bees you vowed to keep are hunkering around the heartmeat. Even the tree rings grow closer together. You won't exactly be a child again, but maybe a boy, small for your age, not yet worn down by manliness or illness. Each day you'll watch the shadows clock across the lawn. And at your favorite hour of day, you'll rise, step outside of the body of thought to fly your diamond kite in the soft spoken wind. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. All right. So now that all of our wonderful poets have read, thank you all for sharing with us. If any of the audience members have questions, why don't you pop those in the chat? But to start off, I thought maybe you guys could talk a bit about the process of, writing these past or this last, each of your poetry books. What's it like? Where did you pull inspiration from? Kind of go from there. Michael, do you want to start since, you were the first off?
Sure. I have a pretty strong storytelling impulse, I would say. A lot of, and I think that at least for the echo chamber, like the idea behind the book was retelling the myth of Echo and Narcissus. I read like 6 or 7 translations of Ovid. In that story, just to keep hearing different versions of it being run through. My son was taking Latin at the time. He's now a college freshman, but we played around with trying to translate it ourselves. And the idea was that I just wanted, the idea of living in echo chambers is so much a part of where we are right now, where the algorithm is just selling you yourself. We can all sit side by side and put in the same Google search terms and get back different results. And then you take selfie culture, and it's like it just seemed too easy, the whole idea of the myth of Narcissus. And so what I wanted to do was go back and retell it. I hated it when I was a kid, and there would be classical allusions that I didn't get. So I thought I would just build crib notes into the book. But then the first half of the book was just really about all, like I say, those, and that's mostly what the poems I read from are, just moments of where those things are being manifest in contemporary culture. You know, there's a poem about the Trojan horse that was really about, in some ways, the 2016 election, about who were the ones who invited, you know, I guess the violence into the sacred temple, so to speak. And then afterward, I gave myself permission to just write about poems that actually referenced Echo and Narcissus because I told their story. So I got to just use them as characters, although sometimes in 21st century America, you know, and it was kind of fun. So that was my gig. I actually have one too, Christopher. I was thinking, is it called A Man Walks into an Emotion?
Yeah.
I love that poem. Oh my God.
Thank you.
And
it's called A Man Naming a Feeling is what it's called.
Okay. And
but yeah,
I've got one called The Man on the Screen, where it's like a man walks into a club held by a policeman, you know, and it kind of goes from there. But it's like, that's called The Man on the Screen. It was definitely, you could feel the Trump years kind of resonating throughout the book, even though that wasn't what it was about.
Yeah.
And I like joke structures a lot too, Steph. That's the last thing I'll say. I really like that form, and I think it's a form that is a sly way of, I can't remember who it was. Someone, the quote is like, you know, a poem is a joke that's learned jujitsu.
Oh, I love that.
And,
yeah. Sorry.
Well, speaking of that, Michael, I'm just going to comment on your poems just because it really struck me that you mentioned Ovid, because I wrote down while you were reading, I wrote metamorphoses, because I kept picking up on these these quiet metamorphoses, like when the eyebrow becomes a caterpillar. You know, these kept occurring to me, and I wrote that word down, and then it's just so great to have you to validate that, because I love that in your poems.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely.
Anyway, Devon, take it away.
Oh gosh, I was just thinking about you talking about comedy and jokes, Michael. I'm one of those people who I've always like admired those who can be funny. I don't have the timing. Like, I'll think of the thing like way after the fact. So I like extra appreciate people who can be witty in the moment. But also,
you're
just
so hilarious the day after.
I'm so funny tomorrow. But the last poem that you wrote, or the last poem in the book, sorry, the comedian. Am I messing that? Okay. I was just thinking about making room for silence, and how that also too is the role of the poem. I feel like there's this like call to silence as well. So the poem is like a joke that has learned jujitsu, but also just that relationship to silence. I was really struck by that. Oh, the book though. Sorry, what was the question again? It was about like the process of writing.
Yeah, just the process of writing it, kind of where you drew inspiration from.
Yeah. For me, the first lines of the book that I wrote, I was working as a bartender, and so I would kind of, be being a really bad bartender in the way that I was like almost like dissociating and like thinking of like poems I wanted to write, like while, making a corpse reviver too. So I would like write lines on guest checks, and then I didn't really have anywhere to put them. So I'd put them under the register with like the tip receipts where you like enter them in at the end of the night. So kind of just like some of the first lines arrived in fragments, and even just like honestly incidental eavesdropping into people's conversations. Not meaning to, but just that like eavesdropping is actually like kind of unavoidable, right? Like we do it all the time. And then just listening, I guess, a little bit to people from the area I hail from. I find their idioms and vernacular to be endlessly fascinating. So yeah, kind of capturing a landscape maybe through these kind of this sort of like congregation of voices. I will pass the baton to Christopher.
Yeah, that was really great context and for your thank you. Yeah, this feels like one of those moments where you answer the question that you wish was asked. Excuse me. Or that you imagine was asked. I guess I'll just sort of describe my book a little bit because I think that's really also a answer to the process question. But yeah, I think my book has got a pretty kind of clear theme to it. Yeah, it's a collection of poems that kind of investigate the life inside of the dominant culture of the dominant strain of masculinity, and manliness. That sort of kind of an exploration of a life of that, and just going back and sort of meditating on different moments and experiences and trying to sort of process that life, that sort of script that's handed to a lot of us, and sort of digging into some of that stuff in the book, sometimes in humorous ways, I think, or goofy ways, whether they're humorous or not, is not really for me to say. But yeah, so there are a lot of really personal poems in there too. I mentioned during my reading about that. It's just so interesting to decide, just even in general, like what poems we're going to read, from the book, and why not these other ones? It's just such a question that I've asked myself, as I've written books and given readings, and maybe that's a good question for other folks here, because you all have had to make these choices too. Like why do you choose to read certain poems in your book or not? I mean, do you hold back some of them for certain reasons? Do you ever think?
I do. I mean, sometimes because they're too sad, or I don't know. I find readings to often just have the more of a celebratory energy, or I don't know. The communal Zoom readings often have 3 or 4 folks when you're in live and you're with an audience. I'm not really afraid of pathos or emotion, but some of them where it's just too, even though it's being honest, it just feels like it's pretty bleak and there's no redemption. And it's like, I don't know if I want to feel like that right now. I think I'm going to have another beer after the reading's over, kind of. So I definitely, there are certain books, although it was fun. Like I hadn't read Florida before. I hadn't read what I did. And, I do, eventually I'd like to read every poem in the book live at least once, just to kind of see what happens,
That's great. Wow. That's great.
Yeah. There are definitely poems that, like, I'm thinking about your question, Christopher, that they sort of feel like they want to find their way to someone who's sitting alone in a room. And so and that might be the person who's in the Zoom, coming into a Zoom reading. And yet as a reader, you feel a group, even if there are people who are actually in solitude as they're watching. And I think that's kind of a little bit of a head trip for the reader to, like, think about all those possibilities sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes persona too. Persona is tricky because if you got a speaker in your poems who's a little bit off or saying some things, and this, I don't always want to inhabit the asshole, to just call it what it is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, Christopher, you said something interesting about, not having read a couple of your poems before out loud, which I'm not a poet or a writer, so that kind of struck me as surprising, maybe, like that it is such a different beast, like on the paper versus, being spoken aloud. Michael, Devon, do you guys ever find that too, that when you're reading a poem aloud for the first time, it kind of surprises you in ways you didn't expect?
Yeah. I'm always, especially like I'll read poems that I think are funny and they're not. And I'll read poems that I think are heartbreaking and people will start laughing, It's like 7th grade again.
Oh yeah, I've read things before. It's like, I think this is funny, and then someone comes up to me after a reading, and they're like, "That was really grim," and and it was so gothic. I'm just like, what? Oh wow! And it just like kind of recalibrate. Or maybe it doesn't recalibrate, but just casts a different hue on the poem for you for really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just looking through our comments. Bit of a quiet audience this evening. So many compliments, though. Such a wonderful group of readings.
Just a lot of love. There's just love.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
All the questions were answered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Devon, I love the fact that you used to stash your poems. They were on the receipts and they went where the currency did. That's interesting.
Yeah, right. And I was like, oh gosh, like is the word register left my mouth too? It was like, but yeah, it's true. Really weird. I had a question for Christopher, because you had there's the poem where you were talking about before you read it, the reenactment. What battle, or you don't have to say if you don't want
no,
to.
Yeah, it was I think it was, well, I've actually been to multiple, so in Princeton, New Jersey, as a kid, I would go to some reenactment things, and then also in North Carolina, where I lived for a long time, just like Civil War reenactment stuff. So I think some of it I think they kind of blended, even though they're very different, obviously very different time periods for the trappings of war. But yeah, reenactments. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even really remember like when I decided to write that, but yeah, reenactment.
I loved that line in your poem. I don't know who invented violence.
Yeah.
And thinking of sort of reinventing a violence that someone already invented. Like, that's like, yeah. I
Thanks.
Yeah.
We just got a question from John for Michael. He says, Michael, I just got your book and many of the poems seem so visceral. Did you ever work on a farm or for animal control or in a vet's office?
I did work on a farm. I worked on a dairy farm in Olmsted County just as a laborer for a few summers. Yeah, I grew up in what they call in Minneapolis, outstate Minnesota. So yeah, and there's a farmer named Larry Pete who I worked for, who I think he only had about 110 Holsteins, but so I did, I've cleaned the fly specks off the milking, pipes, and spent a lot of time around large animals and those lovely smells. And so I don't know how they've sort of leaked in, but it does give you
so beautiful. Yeah,
they really are. Oh my God, their eyelashes are off their hook. And their heads are about the size of your torso, so you can come up and hug them, and they just go flat against you. It's a really amazing, beautiful thing.
That's sweet.
The beauty of bovines is hugely underrated. So,
yeah. I think if you could get bovine eyelash DNA located, that'd be hotter than Botox, I'm pretty sure.
Cow-like beauty.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your question, John.
Yeah. All right. So we got to wrap up soon, but maybe before we leave, each of you could, I don't know, give us a little teaser. What are you working on next? What's coming out the pipes? What do we have to look forward to from you?
A long fallow period.
Yeah.
I am very happy to see this book go wandering off on its short little legs, and I really don't know what the next. I'm actually doing this summer. Pandemic slowed me down. I will admit it. I been doing a lot of translation, which still is lovely in its work that I value. Umberto Acabal is a Quiche Maya poet who just died a couple of years ago, and I love his work. So I've been doing a lot of translation of his poems, which keeps me busy and everything. I have no idea what my next book is going to be.
There you go. Rest. Devon, how about you? You mentioned something earlier.
Yeah, Devon, you're reading new work. That Lazarus poem was a banger too.
Thank you. It's
That's great.
It's the title poem for the next manuscript, which I sent to Daniel a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I wrote it at the same time as Philomath, but it was more or less. But it was a lot more kind of these like obsessive, formalish poems than the kind of more narrative ish poems that you get in Philomath. So I kind of need that alternating current of working on two projects at the same time. The thrill of like having this project be the mistress and this one over here. Not to create a bad metaphor there, but yeah, right now I'm actually working on a collection of short stories. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And Michael, I'm really excited for that translation. That sounds really amazing.
I think there's 4 or 5 coming out in the next Copper Nickel. So keep your eyes peeled.
Oh, okay. Good. Yeah. I will. Look at my eyes on the mailbox.
Mm-hmm. Chris, how about you? Anything?
We're working on a building. That's the old gospel song. Not, here and there, bits and drabs. We'll see. I'm just
can't put a timeline on it.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much for sharing your beautiful words with us this evening. It has been such a pleasure to have you. And thank you, of course, to everybody in the audience for coming out tonight. We appreciate you being here and sharing this evening with us. And until next time.
Thank you.
Bye, all.